So hi everyone, I hope that you're all doing well. Welcome to this webinar about what kind of urban culture is needed for a bike sharing system to win people's hearts in the US. We will get started in about 5 more minutes. While we are still waiting for a few participants to join in, I invite you to play a little game by scanning the QR codes that you can see on the right side of the screen. And as I was saying, we will be starting in about 5 minutes. Hi and welcome for those of you who just joined in for this meetup. We will get started in about 3 minutes, so you still have time to play the game by scanning the QR code on the right side of the screen. Hi everyone, 1 more minute before we get started with our webinar. So again, feel free to scan the QR code and play the game. You still have time to do so. Okay, so hi again, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well. We will get started with this meetup about what kind of urban culture is needed for a bike sharing system to win people's hearts in the US. So my name is Mathilde. I work as a public affairs officer for CUSIT. My role is to gather and share information about micromobility, to address collectivities, operators, and the different actors of the shared mobility world. For those of you who don't know CUSIT, CUSIT is a French software company. We were founded in 2014. Our mission is to simplify shared mobility to make cities more pleasant, efficient, and sustainable. We support bike sharing operators to help them simplify their operations by optimizing the logistics on their field operations. So in concrete, we help them do the collection of the bikes, the maintenance of the bikes and the stations, the battery swap, but also the rebalancing of the fleet. Worldwide, we work with 30 cities across the globe. You can see on the map that we're present on 40 countries on 3 different continents. We work with public actors as well as with private actors. In the US, we are present in Long Beach with the operator Pedal Movement, with Cap Metro in Austin, with Miami, Miami, Aspen, and Philadelphia with the operator's bicycle transit system. As we have here gathered with us today, Nate from the bicycle transit system team. Hi, Nate. Send some support and some reaction in the chat for him if you can. That will be gladly appreciated. So first of all, some information about the meetup. So just know that the meetup is recorded. All the slides will be shared at the end of the presentation, at the end of the meetup, along with a document with all the questions that will be asked during this meetup, as well as with the recording that you will also be able to access on our website, www.cusit.com. During the speakers' presentations, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us through the chat. All the questions will be answered at the end of the speaker's presentation. Don't worry if we don't have time to answer all of your questions. The answers to your questions will be on the document sent by email. The meetup will last 1 hour and a half, and we will finish on time. This meetup, this 1 hour and a half, has already started. So, first of all, I would like to give some facts about the cities of our speakers of today. We have gathered here with us Kim Lucas from the City of Pittsburgh. Again, if you can send some support in the chat for her, and a huge welcome. And for our first speaker, speaking about the City of Pittsburgh, I would like to share with you the great initiative that they launched really recently in May 2024. This is the adaptive bike share system, Adaptive Pogo, that were launched to suit a variety of riders with a variety of cycles, like tricycles, hand bike, cargo bikes, to adapt to a variety of riders, including people with physical and mental disabilities. We also have here with us today Nate from, as I previously introduced, from the Bicycle Transit System team, General Manager of the Indego Bikeshare system from the City of Philadelphia. So again, send some support for him if you can in the chat. So about great initiatives, I think that they have launched an amazing initiative lately with the free Learn to Ride classes for the people who don't know how to ride a bike. These classes are hosted by the Bicycle Coalition staff of the city, and they also provide free helmets for their riders in order to make them feel safe while learning to ride a bike. And I think that this is amazing. So congratulations. And last but not least, we also have here Anna Tang from the League of American Bicyclists. Again, send her love and support in the chat if you can. So some history about the League of American Bicyclists that was known when it was founded in 1880 as the League of American Wheelmen, simply because bicyclists at that time were known as wheelmen and not cyclists. They were also challenged by roads covered of gravel and dirt. And the league has done an incredible work to improve riding condition for cyclists so that they might better enjoy their sports. And later on, more than 100,000 cyclists from across the United States joined the league to advocate for paved roads. So during this meetup, we will be talking about equity, accessibility, and inclusion. And as we talk about equity, it is my great pleasure to let you know that at QSIT, one of our many roles is to make sure that everyone has access to a bike. For example, in the city of Antwerpen in Belgium, where we work, QSIT ensured that bike stations in remote areas of the city always have bikes available for users. Now, to get started, I would like to give a quick introduction about cycling. Do you know why cycling has become so popular? Please, if you do, send some reaction in the chat so I can see if we have some experts in the audience with us today as I answered this question. So over the years, cycling has become very popular for many reasons. One of them is the environmental concerns. As we all know, bicycles are a sustainable means of transportation that can significantly reduce carbon emissions in urban environments. It also has many health benefits as it is recognized for improving cardiovascular health and reducing rates of obesity. Of course, it is also a sport and a leisure. You might even know the great event that we have in France, known as the Tour de France, to inspire many cyclists, amateur cyclists, and that helps integrating cycling into cultural practices. Of course, all of that would not be possible without urban planning and infrastructure. And as we speak, many cities are integrating bike-friendly infrastructure to support cyclists, such as dedicated bike lanes, dedicated parking spots for e-scooters, e-bikes, cargo bikes, and of course, bike sharing programs. It also has been noted that the majority of cyclists, whether it is private bicycle or public bicycle, are generally white men between the ages of 20 and 50. They usually ride with backpacks and without helmets. So this is what brings us to our topic of today, to understand better how we can extend the use of bicycles, whether it is public or private, to as many people as possible and reach out to communities other than adult white men. So to discuss our topic of today, which is what kind of urban culture is needed for a bike sharing system to win people's hearts in the US, I am joined by three mobility experts, incredible mobility experts. First of all, Kim Lucas, send again some reaction in the chat to give her some love and support. She is the director of the mobility department of Pittsburgh. We also have here with us Nate Bowman-Johnston, previously introduced as the general manager of the Philadelphia's Bikeshare system. And Anna Tang, the bicycle-friendly America specialist from the League of American Bicyclists. So without further notice, we will get started with Kim Lucas. Director of the Mobility Department, who will share an overview of how local authorities are integrating bike sharing system into the daily lives of their residents. Kim, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, everybody. Kim Lucas, as you heard, Director of the City of Pittsburgh's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. And so I'm talking a bit today about how infrastructure is so critical to making sure that people want to ride bikes. Next slide. So I think one thing that I should mention is that my background is in bike share. I used to run Capital Bike Share for Washington, D.C. for a number of years. And that is one of the largest and oldest bike sharing systems in the country. And so, sorry, I'm getting distracted because it's asking me what language I'm speaking, which is English. So I'm just not going to mess with that. And so I come to this work in my role today as someone who spent a lot of time thinking about how to get people on bikes and actually getting bikes into the hands of the people. And back in DC, where I was working, we often ask what came first, the bike lanes or Capital Bike Share. And that same question can be asked in so many cities. So here I have a map that I took from Bike Pittsburgh's website, which I'm sure Anna is familiar with, having previously worked there, that just shows the infrastructure history in the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. So on the left-hand side, in 1980, you can see there was very limited dedicated bicycle facilities. And fast forward in 2019, and there were vastly more. Next slide. In 2020, the city launched its, I think, first Bike Plus master plan. I think the city had a bike plan about 20 years before that, but this was a Bike Plus master plan because we knew that there are more people using bike lanes than just people riding two-wheeled cycles. We already heard about adaptive vehicles. People use electric scooters, they're using skateboards, they're using one-wheels. And so we wanted to make sure that we had a comprehensive and complete network citywide for people to get around safely. And part of that work, and if you go to this plan, which is on our website, the City of Pittsburgh's Bike Plus Master Plan, you'll see we did an analysis of what people can get to from their residences, because the reality is you can have all the bike lanes in the world, but if they don't take you to places, to school, to work, to get food, you're not going to be able to use them. Next slide. So mode trends, takeaways, that first shot was from 1980 to 2019 of the growth in bike infrastructure in the city. So what has happened since 2019? As you can see here, bicycle trips in Pittsburgh have increased by 27%. In a lot of communities that it has stayed about the same. In some, the number of people biking has gone down a little bit, but in others, it has grown. Next slide. A part of infrastructure that doesn't get talked about often, especially when you're talking about bike sharing, because it's not as relevant to a shared fleet, but bike racks. Having a secure place to leave your bike is one of the elements in the mental math people do every day when they say, am I going to drive? Am I going to bike? Am I going to walk? Am I going to take transit? We're fortunate to be in a community where all of those could be feasible options based on where you're living and where you're going. But what you're carrying with you and how secure your bike is going to be when you get there definitely go into that equation. And bike lanes, I'm the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, so we don't own or operate the bike sharing system, but I'll talk about how we do partner and support the bike sharing system. But we're responsible for our roadways. In the city of Pittsburgh, we have over 1,000 miles of roadways. We have 145 city-owned bridges, 600 plus signalized intersections. We have a lot of places, and we're trying to make those places as safe as possible, regardless of how people are getting around. Next slide. So as you can see here, from 2019 to 2023, we completed a number of additional projects. In 2020 and 21, we were a final mile city. So we, as a city, as a community, Bike Pittsburgh and what was known as Healthy Ride then received grant funding to vastly expand the number of bike lanes in the city of Pittsburgh and to implement that bike plan. And we're really proud of the success that we achieved in those first couple years. And you can see based on this map that we continue to grow on that success. Next slide. So I wanted to do a timeline. It might be a little hard to see, but back to the chicken or egg question. So I wanted to kind of highlight a number of the elements that have gone into where we are today, which is a lot of people being able to bike around safely. So in 2002, Bike Pittsburgh was formed. That is the local bike advocacy group that has grown, I think, from 1 or 2 people to many employees and thousands of members. And truly, that is, even though in 1980 there were some bike lanes, so that didn't all begin with Bike Pittsburgh. I think it's important to mention where they are in this history of cycling in our city. In 2015, Healthy Ride launched. So that is the bike sharing program that is now known as POGO in Pittsburgh. In 2017 is when my department launched. So it's important to point out that in Pittsburgh, having a specific Department of Mobility and Infrastructure was not the first department. That was not the first organized group here to make infrastructure safer. A lot of the work that this department does was being done within city planning and public works, but in 2017 is when that, we launched as a separate entity. 2018, the Complete Streets Advisory Group was stood up. And so that's where we bring together members of the public and professionals that are all trying to make our streets better. In 2020, I already mentioned that our Bike Plus plan launched, as well as Move Forward PGH. In 2021, our Move PGH pilot. So Move Forward and Move PGH, they sound the same, they're related, but they're different. Move PGH was the RFP that we put out, and the group that was formed based on that brought together public transit, bike sharing, scooter sharing, car sharing, carpooling, moped sharing, everything into one digital location, one single app, and one physical location typology, which were mobility hubs. And so that was a push by the government and in coordination with all of these partners to say, we all need to be unified, because if we want people to be able to get around without their car, it needs to be as easy as possible for them to use all of these other modes. And so let's be strategic about doing that together. In 2022, POGO, that was the rebrand of Healthy Ride. So that's the bike sharing system that we have today. Same operator, new brand, and new equipment. They launched with 50% electric bikes, which I saw in the chat, somebody commented on our hilly topography in Pittsburgh. So it's really important to mention that e-bikes have been transformative for that. In 2023, we relaunched the Complete Streets Advisory Group after a little bit of a hiatus. In 24, POGO launched its adaptive vehicles, and in 2024, our mayor recommitted to our Vision Zero goals. Next slide. So just to break down sort of the difference between what the city does and what the bike sharing nonprofit does, we as a city are eligible for federal funding. And so there are certain sources that we apply for that we then use to buy equipment for POGO, so bikes and stations. We coordinate with the utility provider because half of those stations are electrified. And so they need to plug into the electricity grid so that bikes can be charged out on the street instead of being picked up and driven somewhere to be charged. And so we handle some of that coordination. We permit all of the POGO stations. And we advocate for employer memberships. Right now, if you're a City of Pittsburgh employee, you get a free bike share membership. And so by demonstrating our commitment as a city to getting around in this healthy way, we know that we're modeling for other employers. In contrast, POGO, they plan, they install, and they maintain stations. And I'm sorry that there's something wrong with my font where it's coming out, where things are running together. I promise my original presentation doesn't look like that. They manage and balance their fleet. They own the equipment ultimately. They fundraise a lot for that equipment in their operations. And they coordinate with us on infrastructure and other ideas. Next slide. And then again, someone mentioned the hills of Pittsburgh. This is a image I stole from the internet of a Dirty Dozen ride where some people find it fun to go up a lot of those hills. I have to admit, if you look at this photo, you probably see a lot of people that represent the demographic that we heard earlier is predominantly seen in cycling. I assure you that is not what people that this is not what everybody looks like who rides bikes in Pittsburgh. And I think POGO deserves particular credit for having very diverse membership and representation on their bikes. Is it as diverse as it could be? Can you carry your kids on bikes? No. And so we're not where we could be as sort of an industry or a culture yet in the US on making sure that we're getting these ways of getting around in the hands of people who have different needs. But we've moved the needle. Next slide. And success. In 2024, Pogo saw about 400,000 trips, which you can see here was nearly double the record of the previous year with over 200,000 trips. So the proof is in the pudding. Electric bikes change lives. They're going to continue to expand the network. I think they have 53 new stations that they've identified that they're working to install. And they have adapted their membership and their fee structure so that it's as accessible as possible. Capital Bikeshare, as we see here, is another great example of partnership. So again, I used to work for Capital Bikeshare. To the customer, Capital Bikeshare just looks like a massive bike sharing system that covers Washington, D.C., different communities in Virginia and different communities in Maryland. The reality is that it's actually 7 different bike sharing systems owned by 7 different municipalities, but who have been very cooperative and strategic to work together so that it's a seamless experience for the people on the street. And so as we look to expand Pogo, the community outside of the city of Pittsburgh's boundaries so that people can, get to the neighborhoods right outside of Pittsburgh, those types of relationships are going to be important here as well. And with that, I think my last slide is the next one, which is just that the responsibility is shared. So safety on our streets, everybody plays a part in safety. It's not just the roads. It's not just the people biking. It's not just the people driving. We all have our part that we need to do. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kim. That was great hearing about that. Now we will have Nate Bowman-Johnston, General Manager of the Indego Bikeshare system from the City of Philadelphia, share some great initiatives that need to be put in place for making a system more equitable. Nate, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Delighted to be sharing with you about some of our work in Philadelphia. My name is Nate. I'm the general manager for Indego Bikeshare. I work for Bicycle Transit Systems. We're the contracted operator of Indego. We're a 100% woman and LGBTQ owned and led company. I'm really proud of that fact. And I think it ties into some of what I want to talk about around equity, because equity is really core to our identity and kind of part of the reason why the company was founded to begin with. We operate dock-based bike share systems in Philly and then 9 other cities. And we just recently acquired B-Cycle, which is an equipment and software provider. And so now Bicycle Transit Systems is one of the largest dock-based bike share operators in the country. So really excited about that. So I think before I jump into what I really want to talk about, which is equity and some of our equity initiatives, just want to give you some facts about the Indego Bikeshare in Philly. The system was launched in 2015. Since launch, we've had just shy of 8 million trips, and this year we've already hit 1 million trips and are driving towards about 1.3 million. We'll probably land the year there. We've got about 2,500 bikes and 250 stations. We're a mixed electric and classic bike fleet, about actually 60% electric, 40% classic. I think that's another distinctive. We're one of the largest systems in the country that has a majority e-bike fleet. And just a fun fact that was highlighted in a report that I read recently, which is that Indego is actually the 9th largest public transit system in the state of Pennsylvania. It's really cool to see bike share providing that level of service, competing up against big transit authorities and agencies. Next slide. So yeah, as I mentioned, we're a dock-based system, and it really, one of the foundations of Indego is a really dynamic public-private partnership between the City of Philadelphia, who owns the system, and kind of helped to launch the system back in 2015 with a very clear vision around having bike share be a really viable and dynamic form of public transit for the city. Bicycle transit systems, who I work for, we're the operators. And then we have a long-standing relationship with Independence Blue Cross, who's our title sponsor. They've been with us from the beginning, have, again, really shared in the vision of what we're trying to do. And we couldn't have done what we've done or continue to do what we're doing without their support. I think, next slide. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, and just to talk a little bit more about the public-private partnership, because I think it's really, again, one of the distinctives. I think when you think about Indego and what is behind Indego, it really is a very dynamic partnership between the city of Philadelphia and bicycle transit systems with key support from Independence Blue Cross. And it's really founded, that partnership is really founded on shared vision that bike share can be and should be a viable form of public transit for everybody, and that all Philadelphians should use it, not just, the white dudes in spandex wearing backpacks, as you talked about, Matilda. And, that equity is really key to that. And I think from the beginning, from when the system was launched, equity was at the center. And that's really what I want to spend a little bit of time talking about, is some of our equity initiatives that and some of the results that we've seen as a result. So next slide. There are really three components of our equity initiative, which is our reduced fare program, equitable expansion, and educational classes and programming. So the first is our reduced fare program. We have a really successful reduced fare program where individuals who are eligible for PA access or SNAP benefits, which is the food assistance program for low-income individuals in the state of Pennsylvania. So anybody who is eligible for that gets a steeply discounted pass. You can get a pass for as cheap as $5 a month. So you can get on bike share for $5 a month. Our program, which we call the Access Program, was one of the first in the country, and I think has become a model for many other systems. And as I mentioned, we've had a lot of success with the program. We're tracking utilization, the number of pass holders and utilization, upwards of 15% for both. So out of all pass holders, out of all trips, more than 15% are access pass holders, and trips are taken by access pass holders. So we're really proud of how highly utilized the program is, and how it's really providing a critical form of transit for folks who need it the most. And we see that in the data that we look at. We see that utilization rates are 2 to 3 times higher than our standard fare passes. Access pass holders, we see, Philadelphia has some seasonality to it. It gets cold in the winter and our ridership dips in the winter, but we don't see as much of a dip with access pass holders. I think, again, it's just demonstrating how critical bike share is for them in navigating the city and getting to the places that they need to go. Next slide. So along with our reduced fare program, we are, we're really committed to expanding the system equitably. We're in the middle of a big, massive system expansion, growing the system up to 375 stations, about 3,700 bikes. And one of the keys to our success so far with the reduced fare program and the utilization rates that I talked about is sort of getting stations, expanding outside of the core commercial center city corridors into the neighborhoods and communities where people live. I believe NACTO did a study a while back that showed that, for people to really use bike share, there needs to be a station within 1,000 feet of where they live, where they work, where they play, where they go to school. And so we've taken that and really applied that into how we're doing an expansion. And so in addition to densifying our core service areas and creating more connectivity, more opportunities for people to get to the places they need to go, we're building infrastructure, building stations in communities of color, low-income, disadvantaged communities, and doing it very strategically in collaboration with really a community engagement-driven approach. That community engagement is kind of the tip of the spear of our expansion approach of engaging with communities and local stakeholders to identify, where stations should go, and then, getting people on board to activate them and actually get them to be used, because it's not true in bike share that if you build it, they will come. It's not true. You have to do a lot more than just build it. You have to do a lot of engagement and be really intentional. And there's so many misconceptions, perceptions about bike share not being for one person or the other. And again, going back to that, the stereotype, cycling is for white dudes wearing spandex. And I think that is pervasive, and it's carried through. And it's probably one of the biggest barriers that we are dealing with in Philly, is breaking down that perception that no, bike share can be for everyone. Next slide. Yeah, and this is where a lot of that work comes in, is through our classes and programming and our outreach and community engagement efforts. In addition to sort of like the representation and people feeling like bike share is for them, there's also other barriers. There are infrastructure barriers, like Kim talked about, and the city. We partner closely with the city, and actually my colleague Wafia Murray, I want to call her out. She's on this call. I work very closely with her and others from the city to address infrastructure needs, building out bike lane networks and things like that. But there are also other barriers in terms of people not feeling safe or comfortable riding a bike. We've had many people who are now customers and avid users of Indego who didn't know how to ride a bike to begin with. And so early on in the program launch, we identified that education and classes were going to be key to success, especially when it came to reaching, to developing equitable programs. So we have a whole calendar of safety education classes, learn to ride classes throughout the calendar year that people can sign up for. They're free. Our learn to ride classes are really popular, and people show up to them. There's a bike share bike for them, and they literally learn how to ride a bike, and they walk away knowing how to use a bike, and oftentimes with a Indego pass in their hand, and a helmet as well. Provide helmets to people who complete our classes. We also have a really successful community ambassador program that's run on an annual basis. We have a different cohort every year, and these are folks that live in the communities where we're working, where we're either expanding to or where we already have infrastructure. And these are folks that know the neighborhood, they know the communities, they know people, and they're able to really help with the activation and outreach. And, again, breaking down that barrier of bike share can be for me, bike share can actually be for me. There are people that are like me, that look like me, that have my same experience and background, that are using it, and it can be for me. So our ambassador program, hugely successful, and a huge part of our strategy and tactics in terms of doing bike share in an equitable way. We also have an advisory committee, which is new. We launched it this past year, and this is a group of stakeholders, community stakeholders, folks who have been around and been with us for a long time, have a lot of perspective and insight, and are from the communities that we serve. And this is a group of people that we brought together on a quarterly basis to help us make decisions about strategy and about, things like pricing increases, things like expansion, where we're going to put new stations, and, what areas of the city we're going to target next. And I think this was a really key initiative for us in terms of equity and opening up the table, opening up the sort of power structure, the decision-making structure to folks that are really invested in it, and folks that, maybe in the past haven't had that access. And I think that's part of equity, is like empowering the people that you're trying to serve to help make decisions about what, what you're doing, about your initiatives and your programming. So that's been really successful. And we're going to be running that again this coming year with a new cohort of advisors. We have a mini grants program where we distribute mini grants to local nonprofits who are doing good work to promote bike share and other, just sort of bike friendly initiatives. And we have several awards that we make each year. And, and it just helps to, again, build a community of supporters and build a community of folks that are doing work, that are embedded in communities and are doing work to promote bike share in Philly. We have a Wheels to Work program, which is where we work with employment providers, folks that are going through workforce development, and they get a free bike share pass, because one of the barriers to getting back into the workforce or finding your way into the workforce can sometimes be transportation. And so these folks go through some of our classes and programming, and then they get an Indego pass that they can use as they do their employment search and navigate all the complexities of that. Diversity on our team is really important too, and it's one of the things that I think there's lots of opportunity for improvement. Our staff is a very field-based team. We have folks that are in vans driving around the communities, fixing bikes, servicing stations. We have folks on cargo bikes that are doing the same. And going back to the perception of, is bike share for me? I think one of the factors in that is, like, what do our staff look like? Do they look like the people in the communities that we're serving? Does it seem like somebody who lives in one of those communities could get a job with us doing the work? And that's where diversity comes into play. I think having a diverse team that reflects the communities that we serve is really important in breaking down that barrier of bike share can be for me, Indego can be for me. Maybe there's even a place for me to work at Indego. So that's really key when it comes to equity. And then finally, the City of Philadelphia, in partnership with Bike Transit, we developed a Indego equity plan, a 5-year plan. This is it's publicly available. You can search it up on the internet. And this is basically our solidifying our commitment to equity in a document. And it's a document that is not just a document that we set on the shelf and is going to collect dust. It has it's a very dynamic document that has key deliverables, measurable outcomes, and goals that we're going to hit and that we're targeting that we're going to hit over the next 5 years to make Indego even more equitable. So that's another kind of core component of solidifying our commitment to equity, making it public, talking about it in the public sphere, and holding ourselves accountable to it. So I think, just to wrap everything up and close my comments, I think we have Indigo's done a lot when it comes to equitable bike share. Equity in bike share requires investment and resources. It's not free. And the extent to which we've been able to invest in equity and build up these programs is really dependent on a healthy and financially sustainable business model. And I think, again, going back to the public-private partnership, we've been able to build that in through our contract with the City of Philadelphia and our sponsorship with IBX. We've been able to build Indego into a financially sustainable business that can support equity and invest in equity for the long term. And I think that's really important to just name that equity requires investment. The money has to be there to make it happen. And you have to prioritize financial sustainability and I think that's really key to reaching the hearts and minds to the topic of this webinar of the U.S. the U.S. audience when it comes to bike share. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. I agree 100% with you. Thank you for sharing all the great initiatives that you have in the City of Philadelphia with the Indego Bikeshare system. Now we will have Anna Tang, Bicycle Friendly America program specialist from the League of American Bicyclists, show sharing a little bit about how cycling has become more accessible to the American people. Anna, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. Nice to see some familiar names on the participant list. So hello to those who I know. Thank you for having me. And I want to apologize up front in case a dog barks in the background. I am dog sitting and I can hear him getting antsy in the background. So sorry if he barks. But anyways, yeah, so I'm here to talk about basically bike share from the league's perspective. And I kind of titled the presentation I'm going to do called like how to get people to use bike share, which is like the $1 million question. You know, if we had that solved, then I think, you know, we wouldn't need to have this presentation. So there's a lot of things that go into it. If you want to go to the next slide, please. The League, kind of like what Mathilde said, is the oldest national advocacy group in the United States. We were founded in 1880 to help get roads paved so that it was easier to bike on them and to also advocate for cyclists' rights to the roads. And we've been, you know, in existence since then. We've had a lot of ebbs and flows over time, but, you know, we've been pretty consistent advocating at the federal and local level for the needs of bicyclists. Next slide. Just to introduce myself a little bit, you know, like I was introduced earlier, I am with the League of American Bicyclists. I'm the Bicycle Friendly America specialist. I'm putting a link to our website in the chat. So if you want to go and check it out, we do a lot of programming around what it takes to be a bicycle friendly America. We have programs for communities, businesses, universities, and states. And in the past, I've worked on doing a lot of community organizing, campaign planning, bike education, curriculum development, and working at universities. So I come with like a lot of perspective around like what it takes to help people to get on bikes. Next slide. And just to kind of frame this conversation, I thought it would be good to talk about like biking in the United States and thinking about how people are using the roads and systems across the United States. About 8% of the population in the US doesn't have access to a car. And so thinking about like, how are those people getting around? So just one second. So how are those people getting around? And thinking about like what is 8% of the population? You know, they're biking, they're walking, they're busing, they're carpooling, all of these things. And this percentage is going to be different in every community, but these people need options besides a car to get around. And so one of the solutions for that is bike share. Next slide, please. So like thinking about like what kind of a culture do you need? So not only do you need options to get around, but you need support. So you need support from, you know, the community. You also need support from the leadership. And you want other people who are also on board to get this. Next slide, please. So things that I was thinking about, like what kind of questions do you need to ask to get to the solution? So like what problems are you trying to solve with your bike share? So do you have a high percentage of your population that doesn't have access to a car? Do you not have like a bus system? Maybe there's like first, last mile kind of connections that you're looking for to solve. So where's your community at in your bike journey? Thinking about that. So maybe, you know, there's almost nothing going on in your community around biking. So where is bike share going to fit in that story? Do you have community support? So maybe you have a resident that was particularly interested in getting this. And so you're working with them, or maybe you have somebody who is on council or the mayor is interested in doing some more green initiatives or reducing greenhouse gas in your community. So thinking about like where you are in your bike journey for your community is a question I think you should think about. Political support. So it's really hard to do bike share in your community if you don't have a little bit of political support. And that can be literal political support. So getting like your mayor, your council people, people who work in government to support it, or it could be like just people who have a lot of political sway. So if you have a university or a large business that is really interested in getting bike share or doing something with biking that can support it, that can be really helpful. Hospitals or other large business entities. And then what other options already exist for people to get around? So if there's already a robust busing system or light rail or scooter system, maybe you have a really awesome sidewalk network that people are already using, but thinking about like what gap in the transportation network is bike share going to solve? Next, please. So effective bike share, solves all of those problems, and it also it could solve just like one of those problems. But to be an effective bike share, I believe it needs to solve a problem. It has to be easy to use for the user side. It should be affordable, and that means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. So having those tiered prices, kind of like what Nate and Kim were talking about, having it accessible, meaning that there's bikes available in a lot of different places in your community, and that it's predictable. So you can rely on it, and that there'll always be a bike available for wherever you live. Next, please. So also thinking about like from the community perspective. So at the national level, we see a lot of different examples and a lot of different types of communities with bike share. So what we've seen from the community is that people are more willing to bike when it's safe, protected, predictable infrastructure for bicyclists to use, kind of like what Kim was talking about with the bike infrastructure. So having something that's safe for people to actually get on a bike and go out and use it. People are more likely to bike when they see examples of people doing the activity, kind of like what Nate was saying, like, are there people actually using the system that look like me? And also like, have people been asked? So a lot of times I've heard people say like, well, nobody's ever asked me to use the bike share system, or nobody's told me that I can use it, and it might seem really obvious, but sometimes the most obvious questions are the ones that you need to ask. Next slide, please. So from the company perspective, we also see a lot of different things that an operating system or like the company owning the bike share system needs to have, which is persistence. So like going back again and again out into the community to work with them, meet them where they're at, and to ask them what they would like to see with it, which is kind of the same thing as dedication. But I think dedication versus persistence is a little bit different in that like you just need somebody who is in it for the long haul. So it can be very hard to secure funding, or maybe your bike share system goes out of business that provides the bikes and you have to like find new bikes to use. So you need people who are really in it to solve these issues, for the long haul, and they're willing to put in that dedicated time and effort. I think creativity is something else that you need to have, because you're figuring out a lot of solutions for a lot of different problems. There's geography-based things, finding station locations, working with a lot of different types of people, a lot of different types of needs, and you're doing a lot of outreach and a lot of different things. So having the ability to be creative in the work that you're doing is necessary, and then collaboration. So being able to collaborate with a lot of different organizations, a lot of different types of entities, and the willingness to do that, I think, is also needed from the company side of things. Next slide. So talking a little bit into equity and accessibility, which is one of the many topics for today's presentation. But, like bike share comes in all shapes and sizes, from the types of operators to different ways that communities have found solutions. Like universities are one place where they do, loans to the community. They also do loans for students. A lot of times communities will get involved in the bike share system, and, it'll just be from the community directly. Like it'll be a free lending library out of like a shipping container, kind of like what the picture shows, or it'll be through a library, and the library, they already have a lending system in place. And so they'll own a fleet of bikes, and they'll provide backpacks, locks, lights, and that whole system. Another aspect to equity and accessibility is pricing. So how much are people paying and how can they pay for it? Not everybody has access to a credit card or a cell phone. So are there ways that you can work to pay cash or maybe do a no fare for people in need? To maybe like the different things for like corporations who actually can afford, like a big lump sum price for all of their employees. So just thinking about like what is accessible and equitable for the pricing varies between the people. Thinking about location. So that's a big thing in equity and accessibility is where the stations are located and the rollout plan for getting those started or getting more fleet installed like over time and thinking strategically about like who are you servicing and where are the end trips. So like putting them by essential businesses, maybe near like bus lines or transit lines, and just thinking about the experience from the user side of things and what makes sense. So thinking about like equity accessibility on that level. The surrounding infrastructure is something else. So is it somewhere that feels safe and is also like accessible to people? So is it like a protected bike lane? Is it something that all ages and abilities could ride? And it's not just, like in a dark alleyway or something where it might not feel as safe or secure to use it. And then also thinking about the types of bikes that people are using. So kind of like what Kim mentioned earlier, like, is there something for families? Can you adjust the height of the bike? So if you're shorter, there's something that you can use or a kid could use. Adaptive bikes, obviously. But is there a way for you to carry like your groceries or like your supplies that you're using? And just thinking about all the different types of bikes that are out there and what's available in your fleet. Next slide, please. So I thought I'd go through a couple of bike share examples. You already heard about two of the best in the United States. So I just thought I'd give a little bit of a different one. Pictured here are like a community co-op where that's one way of doing a bike share, which is like all community led, and they do all the repairs, lending, and everything just based out of a community led garage. The other one is like a docking system in this picture. Next slide, please. A lot of times communities will do like their own types of events, but they don't have to be one and done. There's like a myriad of ways that you can do different types of events. This is a picture from a new publication that we put out in the last year or so, and this is called like our idea book, where we give a lot of different examples of all the types of work that we do at the League. This one is specifically talking about bike share in a rural community because oftentimes people think bike share is only for like huge cities where they have a massive network and a lot of people, but it can also happen in rural communities. Some are through like libraries, like I mentioned earlier, and there's just different solutions for different types of places. You can read all about that in our idea book. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is just kind of continuing with the topic of being equitable and accessible for everybody. And thinking really about like, who are you serving and how are you serving the people who need to use these bikes? Next slide. I didn't realize like Kim was going to be talking so much about Pogo, which is awesome, but they are one of the leaders in adaptive bike share. Believe it or not, the United States doesn't have a lot of adaptive bike share. There's a lot of adaptive bikes out there. There's obviously a lot of people out there biking of all abilities, but having bikes to fit the needs of those people is few and far between. Next slide, please. I thought that to mention like for Pogo itself, like they do have free bikes during its pilot, which is this year, which is an interesting way to like go about offering bikes, and obviously a great price point. And here you can see like the picture of some of the different types of bikes that they have, and getting rentals for like 2 hours to test it out. Next slide, please. And the last example that I have slides for is Adaptive Mogo, which is the adaptive bike share out of Detroit. And they do a lot of different rides for people. They have very similar bikes to Pogo, like recumbent, quadricycles, a lot of different types of bikes. And they do rides specifically for people with different abilities and different disabilities. And I'll also mention one other one as a closing, which is in Fort Collins, Colorado. Their University of Colorado, they have an adaptive bike share for their students, and they will deliver the bikes to students instead of expecting the people with disabilities to get to the bikes. They take the bikes to those people. And so like that's just another way of thinking about like the accessibility side of things. And with that, that was kind of the end of all of my slides, but there's a lot of different examples all across the United States, and we're here, the League is here to help you all find the solutions to all of your problems and questions. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for sharing with us your overview of how cycling has become more accessible to the American people. We will now have a time for question. I will lead the dance by asking first some question to our panelists, and then we will have time for a question from the audience. And about half an hour, we will conclude this meetup. So, Kim, you have given us a great insight about all the infrastructure and bike projects that have been realized so far in the city of Pittsburgh. What would be the next steps in the years to come for the city and the greatest challenges?
Thank you for that question. In terms of bike infrastructure, a lot of the low-hanging fruit projects, so the ones that are kind of easier to implement because they might have physical space to put in something without taking away too many other things, or there were a lot of people already using it. A lot of those have been achieved. And so I think it's going to be more difficult as we try to get into those places that have been just more difficult because they're more constrained. But we are going to continue to build out our complete network. There's also a vision for bike sharing where every person who lives in the city of Pittsburgh could get to a bike share station within 5 minutes of walking. And that is a goal that I have heard of from our bike sharing system. So also continuing to figure out how we can invest in them to make that goal a reality is going to be really critical.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Nate, we have learned a lot about all the amazing equity initiative that you've put in place over the years with the Indego Bikeshare system. I would have one more question that is beyond your core community. Which other demographic group, and by demographic group, I mean African American communities, Latino communities, Asian communities, have shown an increasing interest in using bicycles?
I think we've seen it across the board. I think, without singling out any one group, I think we've seen, our ridership, our general ridership, the diversity of our ridership grow. And I think a big part of that is because of our expansion and getting stations into communities where people live and creating that access. And also the reduced fare program, creating access from a cost standpoint. So I think we're seeing more diverse ridership. Now we have lots of room to grow in terms of that. There's a lot of things that we can, there's a lot more people to be reached. There's a lot more barriers to break down. We're going to be adding another 125, 150 stations to the network over the next 2 years. And so I think we'll see that the diversity in our ridership continue to grow there. We're also, one of the big things that, again, shout out my colleague Wafia Murray, who's on the call. One of the big things that we're talking about is bridging the gap with our reduced fare program between, we're coming out of a recession in this country, and so there's a lot of people who don't meet the criteria for low-income food assistance in the state, but still can't afford a bike share pass, and it's too much. And so thinking of ways that we can expand eligibility for our reduced fare program to reach even more people, and again, bridge that cost barrier that is real. And I think it's one of the things that limits who can use bike share in the city. So that's one thing we're really going to be thinking about. And trying to take on, and do it again in a financially responsible and sustainable way that's going to work, and we'll be able to sustain for the future.
Okay, thank you, Nate. And Anna, thank you again for sharing an overview of the type of culture and bike sharing system that exists to reach a greater number of cyclists across the United States. Would you have any other example of bike share system, maybe outside of the one already mentioned previously?
I mean, there are just so many. I think like the ones that like stand out to me the most are the ones that are doing like the equitable engagement, and there isn't like one in particular. I will say like communities that are doing really great equity work are Oakland, California, San Jose, California. They're doing some really incredible like equitable outreach and engagement, and I think that just translates into the rest of the work that those communities are doing by reaching all people and like all types of people, and even going above and beyond to engage children and different groups of people that I think the majority of communities don't necessarily think about. So that trickles into like their bike share system and like how that gets implemented.
Okay, thank you. Questions are open from the audience. I see that we have one more question from Benoit, who says, US bike share system focus a lot on people, BIPOC, sorry for the French accent, communities. Do you have any program on white American communities too? Or do you consider them as too difficult to attract as bike share cyclists regarding their car culture?
I think that's a really interesting question because it's a perspective that I think coming from within the US, we don't hear that question as much. So my first reaction was, well, part of the reason, Capital Bike Share wanted to focus on an equitable approach to pricing and station placement back in the days because our membership demographics were not representative of the communities we were serving. And so disproportionately, you see white American communities adopting bike share and being able to use it for their trips because of how cities have developed a lot about, it can be expensive to live in a location that is accessible to amenities that you could reasonably bike to. And so we've just seen in a lot of cities in the US that I don't know, occurrence, that reality that we've had to that we wanted to focus on BIPOC communities. I will say that there are a lot of folks though that bike sharing, they haven't tried it in white American communities. I think one of the things that was really interesting though with Capital Bike Share, and I think is probably true for all bike sharing systems, is that just by existing and by being in a place that people could use it, there were people that said, I haven't been on a bike in 20 years, but now there's a bike sharing system here. And now I'm trying biking, and having programs that start with recreational trips for people who would never see themselves as a cycling commuter or someone who would take a bike to go grocery shopping, making sure that people know that getting comfortable on a bike on a trail somewhere, that can be a baby step to doing it elsewhere. So I think the overall programs are designed to get people on bikes, all people on bikes. But the reason you've heard us talk about focusing on BIPOC communities is because of the history of not seeing those communities using bike sharing systems the way, if they were planned differently, they may have.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have another question from Zachary. What is the biggest barrier to implementing cargo bikes to bike share fleets? He says, I'm curious because cargo bikes have grown incredibly popular in Europe, especially as car replacement vehicles.
I'm happy to
one of you would like to answer?
I have lots of opinions on this. As someone who owns cargo bikes, I think one of the barriers is if there was an off-the-shelf product for a bike share docking station compatible cargo bikes, I would think you'd see more of them. part of the design that goes into a bike sharing bike is that it's something that needs to be able to live outside in most cities 24/7, 365 days a year. It needs to withstand lots of different types of weather. It needs to fit a wide range of people because there's typically one model that you've got out there. I would love to see the expansion of cargo bikes. I mean, I think there would be a little bit of physical barrier with just the footprint. You know, they tend to be longer. And so in some places that might make it where you can't have a station adjacent to a sidewalk, for example, or even adjacent to a bike lane. Like, I think there are a little bit of those sort of physical challenges that would need to be mitigated. But I think my belief, being the farthest person on this call from bike sharing at this point, is just that there isn't a product out there that people could go out and buy today that would be able to be used in a bike sharing context.
Okay, thank you, Kim. Do any one of you want to add something to that question?
I'll just say that a lot of bike share systems that I've seen that have cargo bikes in them are the ones that are not like with a nonprofit like Indego or Pogo. They're more of the like campus side of things, like at a university or like through a library or something, where it can be rented for maybe like an hour and then it's stored like inside in like the fleet's, you know, like locker room or something like that. And it's a non-traditional bike share system that is just not kind of like what Kim was saying, like, you know, having to dock and have all these other issues that go around it. So I've seen it with that kind of lending situation.
Okay, thank you. If we don't have any more questions from the audience, I think that we will conclude here our meetup of today. So thank you for attending. I hope you had a great time with us, and I hope to see you soon again. Thank you and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.